Ignoring our daughter's fever, my husband resolutely went to meet his first love. Later, he regretted it, but it was too late. By chance, I stumbled upon a post titled, "The Devastating Power of a First Love." One of the highest-rated responses caught my eye. The author recounted her story with her first boyfriend. They had been together for 5 years, until she discovered another woman in his life. A talented, graceful woman with flowing hair, dressed in white, smiling serenely. Only then did she realize she had been nothing more than a substitute. At the time, the post didn't resonate much with me, but a month later, I saw a girl, who looked eerily like me, tearfully accusing the man I liked, before leaving him for good. Her appearance, her demeanor, they were so similar to mine, it brought that post back to mind. When I revisited it, the author had added a new line. If you can't be the unattainable first love he cherishes, be the irreplaceable one he regrets losing. I thought about it. After 2 years apart, she had certainly achieved that. That morning, Candy had a fever, a staggering 104 degrees. I gave her medicine, but it hadn't kicked in yet. As I watched Derek straighten his tie, preparing to leave, I asked, "Could you stay home with Candy today? She's sick, and I can't take leave from the ER. They're short-staffed." He paused briefly, glancing toward the door, distracted. "I've got a case today, court proceedings. There's also a meeting with the client afterward." That was that. I didn't press further, but noticing his tie was slightly crooked, I stepped forward to fix it. He instinctively leaned back, as though recoiling. I froze for a moment, my hands suspended midair. The tension was palpable. Realizing what he'd done, he murmured, "I'll do it myself," then turned and walked out without an explanation. Swallowing the bitterness, I quickly pulled myself together and called our nanny. "Sophia, I'll need you to look after Candy today. If anything comes up, call me. I'll video chat whenever I can." Though I had arranged everything, I couldn't shake the unease as I headed to the hospital. Work commitments already kept me from spending much time with Candy, and now, with her sick, I wasn't there for her. I feared this would only widen the gap between us. During every break in the staff room, I called home to check on her. At PM, I was on a video call with Sophia, who was holding Candy. "Sweetheart, are you feeling any better?" Candy stared at her doll, ignoring me. I bit my lip, wanting to reassure her, but hesitant to make promises I couldn't keep. Suddenly, the staff room door swung open. "Dr. Emily, there's been a multi-car crash at the intersection of Elm and Maple. We need you on site immediately." Startled, I shot up from my seat. Quickly, I told Candy over the video, "Mommy has to work now. Be good for Sophia, okay?" Before she could respond, I ended the call. Lives were at stake. Every second counted. Knowing it would be a long night, I texted Derek on the way to the ambulance, "Try to get home early if you can." 10 minutes later, my team and I arrived at the scene. A truck had rear-ended a car, triggering a domino effect. Several cars were flipped or crushed, some engulfed in flames. It was chaos, bloodied victims, acrid smoke, wailing sirens. My clothes were soon soaked with sweat and stained with blood. "Dr. Emily, over here," a colleague called out to me. I stabilized the patient I was treating and hurried over, but when I saw who they were tending to, I stopped dead in my tracks. There he was, Derek, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. His eyes widened in surprise upon seeing me, as though he hadn't expected me to be part of the rescue team. "You're hurt?" He glanced at the blood on my face and scrubs, mistaking it for my own. He instinctively reached out to touch me, but before he could, the woman in his arms, pale and unconscious, whimpered, "Derek, it hurts." His hand froze mid-air, and he redirected all his attention to her. Red-eyed, he pleaded, "Emily, please, save her." It felt like my heart had been struck by lightning. For a moment, I thought it had stopped beating altogether. But no, the sharp, searing pain told me it was still there, alive and breaking. His eyes held a desperation that left me momentarily dazed. Everyone said I was Derek's first love, his ideal. The love letters he wrote me during high school, 9 in total, seemed to prove it. Yet, I never accepted a single one. My coldness was legendary, my heart seemingly untouchable. But no one knew the truth. In high school, I had secretly loved that rebellious, charismatic boy. I refused to accept his letters because I knew that if I read them, I'd lose all resolve, give in, and abandon my ambitions. I came from nothing, while Derek hailed from a family everyone envied. A girl like me didn't deserve to stand beside someone like him, so I threw myself into my studies, determined to become someone worthy of him. Finally, perseverance paid off. The year I graduated high school, I achieved outstanding results and was granted the opportunity to study abroad. However, my living expenses were insufficient, so I had to juggle both studying and part-time jobs. Life in a foreign country was tough, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through. 2 years ago, I completed my studies and returned home, just in time for a class reunion. That's when we met again. He had grown more mature and handsome since high school. I felt nervous and uneasy. Every time I stole a glance at him, I noticed his deep gaze fixed on me, gentle yet intense. After a few rounds of drinks, most of us were a little tipsy. Some of the wealthier classmates began teasing us. "Emily, all those years abroad, did you find a boyfriend?" I shook my head lightly. "No." One of them chimed in. "Derek doesn't have a girlfriend either. If he loses the next round of games, and Emily can't drink, no one should pity her. Let him take care of her." Hearing this, I instinctively looked at Derek. Our eyes met, and at that moment he curved his lips into a smile and said one word. "All right." After that, everything seemed to fall into place naturally. Before long, we were together. Our love story soon became the talk of our social circle, earning the blessings of old classmates and family alike. Yet deep down, I still felt a twinge of regret and unease, because I knew nothing about Derek's life during the 5 years we were apart. The first time I learned about William was a month and a half into our relationship. William barged into Derek's villa unexpectedly, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed, accusing Derek of being heartless. "Are you really going to abandon me?" Derek looked flustered. He instinctively turned to my confused gaze, holding me tighter in his arms as if afraid I would push him away. "Emily, I'll explain everything to you in a bit." Then his eyes turned cold as he shot a withering glare at William. "Get out. Don't let me see you again." That was his answer. His words were harsh. William's eyes filled with despair before he eventually stormed out. Once the door shut, Derek cautiously confessed to me. It turned out that during the 5 years I was gone, he met William, a girl who bore a striking resemblance to me. He used her as a substitute to ease his longing for me. Suddenly, I remembered a post I had read a month earlier titled, "The Destructive Power of Being Someone's First Love." At the time, I clicked on it out of curiosity, drawn by the term first love. Scrolling through the screen, I came across a highly upvoted response. The respondent shared her story about her first love. They had been together for 5 years, but he never introduced her to his friends or family. One day, she discovered the existence of another woman in his life, a talented, poised woman with long flowing hair, dressed in a white dress, smiling gently. That's when she realized she was just a stand-in. Back then, I didn't think much of it. I just took it as a bit of gossip and sympathized with the poster, feeling relieved that the person I loved had waited for me all these years. Looking back now, it all feels so laughable. "Emily, please don't cry. I was wrong." His voice pulled me out of my thoughts, and I realized tears were streaming down my face. I shouldn't forgive him. But I loved him so much. I had loved him naively for 3 years in high school, and his name and presence were etched deeply into my heart for another 5 years. During my time abroad, the thought of seeing him again and being with him was what kept me going. But why? Why did things turn out this way? My heart ached, throbbing with pain. He said he knew he was wrong. He said he had loved me since high school, that I was the only one he ever cared about. I watched as Derek, his eyes red, slapped himself in front of me. In the end, I softened once more and forgave him, as much as I hated myself for it. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe I should give him another chance. After all, he said I was the only one in his heart. Over time, with Derek's persistent efforts and William's departure, I gradually let go of my resentment. But later, when I revisited that post, I noticed an updated comment that read, "If I can't be the unattainable one he cherishes, then I'll settle for being the one he takes for granted." I dismissed it as nothing more than a bitter remark because Derek had proposed to me. His grand proposal shocked the entire city. Everyone said his eyes held only me, and he made promises I believed at the time. But now I think William, who left 2 years ago, has truly achieved it. She became the one he took for granted. And I, the so-called first love, had gradually become nothing more than plain, ordinary sustenance. William had fractured her left forearm, not too serious. But apparently, she had gone blind. I heard it was an old condition that had flared up again. As it turned out, after leaving, William cried every day until her eyes gave out. This I learned from William's male best friend, who punched Derek before angrily spilling the truth. Instinctively, I moved to steady Derek as he staggered, but he shoved me away. My arm slammed into the wall with a loud thud, the pain causing tears to well up in my eyes. Amid the foggy haze clouding my vision, Derek's reddened eyes were filled with anguish, but they weren't directed at me. I watched as Derek, his steps heavy with sorrow, walked over to William. His trembling hand covered her lifeless, unfocused eyes, and his voice carried guilt and regret. He said, "I'm sorry." Emotions surged wildly within my chest. I fought back tears, clutching my throbbing arm, and retreated from the room one step at a time. My departure, much like my injury, was something he didn't seem to care about. The suffocating ache in my chest grew stronger, so I informed a colleague that I needed to step out onto the rooftop for some air. As the evening breeze brushed against my face, I began to greedily inhale. The fresh oxygen spurred my mind into activity, and certain memories started to resurface. 2 months before college entrance exams, Derek gave me his 9th love letter. At that time, I had already secured early acceptance to a university, so I couldn't resist reading that letter in secret. It was lengthy, nearly 9,000 words. It would be a lie to say I wasn't moved, but I knew I couldn't let myself waver. So on the last page of the letter, I scribbled a single line in response, "Derek, wait for me." I then resealed the envelope and handed it back to him, saying, "Derek, focus on your studies and work hard." But as time passed, the memories of my teenage years, memories I once cherished, were gradually buried under the weight of my marriage. 3 months after our wedding, his growing indifference began to overshadow everything. I often wondered if he regretted marrying me. But every time I thought of bringing it up with him, he'd suddenly claim he had work to handle at the office. His replies to my texts would come hours later, sometimes 3 hours at a time. Once, overwhelmed by it all, I suggested a divorce, but he pulled me into his arms, gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and softly stroked my cheek with his thumb. "Emily, I've been too busy lately and haven't been attentive to your feelings." "I'm sorry," he said tenderly, "but please, don't overthink things and don't bring up divorce again, okay?" His gaze was so firm and sincere at the time that I couldn't help but trust him once more. Later, when I found out I was pregnant, he threw himself wholeheartedly into looking after me, and I gradually let go of the resentment over his earlier coldness. But now, with William back in the picture, his indifference has returned, and he's even started to shy away from my touch. I covered my face, tears spilling through the gaps between my fingers. And as I cried, I began to laugh. This relationship is both ridiculous and tragic. We should get a divorce. Candy stays with me. With my tears dried and my strength depleted, I picked up my phone and sent Derek a divorce request for the second time. The message had barely been sent for 10 minutes, and just as I was preparing to leave, Derek, alerted by one of my colleagues, rushed over. He must have run all the way here, his breath coming in short gasps. "Why are you bringing up divorce again?" "Is it because of William?" "I can explain." His hands clamped down tightly on my arms, sending a sharp pain coursing through me. "What's wrong?" He finally noticed my injured arm, but I didn't want to answer his question. There was no longer any point. I pushed his hands away, creating space between us. Derek, seeing this, tugged at his tie in frustration. His brows knitted tightly together, and his eyes were shadowed with faint anger and annoyance. "Haven't I told you not to bring up divorce again?" William got hurt because of me. During the car accident, she shielded me with her own body. I wasn't exactly a saint back then, and now she's blind because of me. I owe her an apology. I owe her responsibility. Responsibility? I cut him off. How exactly do you plan to take responsibility? By sacrificing the rest of your life, my marriage, and our family? If that's the case, then divorce me. Candy will stay with me. That'll make it easier for you to take responsibility, won't it? Or do you think I'm some kind of saint who can tolerate her husband caring for another woman? Derek stared at me, his gaze suddenly unfamiliar and tinged with disappointment. "Emily, that's not what I meant. Why are you being so aggressive? You used to be so understanding." Understanding? My ass. I was about to snap back with something unkind when my phone rang, interrupting me. It was Sophia calling. For her to call at this hour gave me an ominous feeling. Sure enough, something had happened to Candy. She had a fever earlier in the day that seemed to have gone down, but now it had spiked again, and she was bleeding from her nose uncontrollably. The news made me feel lightheaded, utterly at a loss. The phone's volume was loud enough that Derek overheard everything. He immediately steadied my wavering body. "Don't panic. Sophia is already on her way to the hospital, right? Let's go downstairs and wait for her." Don't think the worst. Kids getting sick and running fevers is normal. As for the nosebleed, it's probably due to the high fever. You're a doctor. You should know this better than I do, right? I nodded, forcing myself to calm down, repeating over and over, "You're right, you're right." Suddenly, the rooftop door swung open. It was William's male best friend. He seemed to be scrutinizing me closely before letting out a mocking laugh and turning his gaze toward Derek. "Honestly, I didn't want to come to you, but she's really anxious. I can feel it. Deep down, she still wants you to be by her side. I told you. I'll cover her medical expenses and make sure she gets the best doctors to treat her eyes." Derek frowned. "But beyond that, I neither have the capacity nor the position to do more. Oliver, instead of coming to me, why don't you take better care of William in the hospital room? She's injured and blind right now. How could you just leave her alone?" His words were laced with unrestrained reproach. My heart sank again, but he took my hand gently, his voice softening. "Let's go downstairs and wait for Candy." As we passed Oliver, his voice echoed faintly behind us. "Ha, Derek, you're just as hypocritical as ever. Emily, guess why he was in the car with William when the accident happened?" The hand holding mine tightened noticeably. When I looked up at him, his eyes avoided mine. Yes, this morning, he had clearly told me he had to appear in court and that a client had invited him to dinner in the evening, so he couldn't be with Candy. who was sick with a fever. That familiar sense of exhaustion and helplessness swept over me again. Slowly, I pulled my hand away from his grip. Without looking back, I walked downstairs by myself. I wasn't sure if Derek had been stopped by Oliver again. Either way, by the time I got into the elevator, he still hadn't caught up. As soon as I stepped out of the hospital's emergency building, I felt something cool land on my forehead. It was raining. By the time I realized it, the droplets had already begun falling faster, catching me off guard. I quickly retreated to the entrance. The rain grew heavier, forming a misty veil in the air. The wind carried the raindrops onto my body, making me shiver uncontrollably. A strong sense of unease surged within me. Just as I pulled out my phone to call Sophia again, I heard someone's tearful, desperate voice calling my name amidst the pouring rain. It was Sophia. But with just one glance, my eyes widened in horror, and I staggered, rushing into the rain. There was Candy, her tiny, pale face streaked with crimson as blood gushed from her nose. The tissues pressed against her face were completely soaked, unable to stop the flow. The blood dripped to the ground, only to be washed away by the rain, leaving no trace. She was so small, yet she was losing so much blood. I stood outside the operating room, drenched from head to toe. Water dripped from my hair and clothes, pooling around me as I stood there, fragile and helpless. I couldn't reach Derek on the phone. The weight of my soaked clothes pressed against me, making it hard to breathe. My body trembled uncontrollably. The door finally opened, and a doctor with a grave expression stepped out. Candy has lost a significant amount of blood. We've discovered she has a clotting disorder, and there isn't enough rare blood type in the blood bank to treat her. Her father has the same rare blood type. Dr. Foster, wait for me, I'll find him right now. I turned abruptly, but my legs gave out and I fell to my knees. Still, I quickly got up and ran desperately toward William's hospital room. Instinct told me Derek must be with her right now. But why, when I pushed the door open with hope, was the room completely empty? I stood there in a daze, my mind blank. Why wasn't anyone there? The next moment, my phone rang suddenly. It was Derek. My heart sank, and a glimmer of hope flickered in my eyes. But before I could say anything, the sound of intertwined, breathless moans came from the other end of the line. With a loud crack, my phone slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, the screen splintering into pieces. Derek, you're so capable. I'm begging you, please save her. She's so little, only 1.5 years old. I couldn't bear to look at Candy on the operating table. Instead, I knelt on the ground, pleading desperately with the doctor performing the surgery. He crouched down and looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. Emily, I'm sorry. I stared at him as despair wrapped around me like vines, suffocating me. No. I rushed to Candy's side, my voice trembling as I whispered to her, Baby, don't fall asleep. Mommy will take you home to watch Peppa Pig, okay? Don't you love Peppa Pig the most? Mommy won't go to work anymore. I'll stay at home with you every day, all right? Please open your eyes and look at Mommy. Someone nearby was sobbing softly. A hand, trembling and red-eyed, rested gently on my shoulder. Emily, I'm so sorry for your loss. I couldn't breathe through the tears streaming down my face. My chest ached so much that I clutched it before collapsing to the ground. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital bed. My eyes stared blankly ahead, my mind still foggy, but tears silently slipped from the corners of my eyes. A familiar hoarse voice called out to me, Emily. It was Derek. His bloodshot eyes met mine, filled with regret and pain so overwhelming it seemed to spill over. I didn't realize Candy's condition was this severe. I'm so sorry. The sound of Candy jolted my nerves, and I shot up from the bed, slapping Derek across his now repulsive and detestable face. I didn't hold back. His face quickly swelled and reddened. "I'm sorry," he kept repeating the most useless phrase. My chest felt like it was on the verge of exploding. Grabbing the water glass on the nightstand, I hurled it at his head. He didn't dodge, and blood began to trickle down his forehead. Flashes of Candy's bloodied little face surged in my mind. I pulled out the shattered phone and opened the call log. The timestamp stared back at me. "When you were with William, could you even hear Candy calling out for you?" Derek's face turned ghostly pale in front of me. I roared, "Derek, you didn't fail me, you failed Candy. If you had been there, Candy wouldn't have died. How dare you call yourself her father? She was still calling for you right before she entered the operating room." The tall man crumbled to his knees. He hunched over, collapsed on the ground, crying with anguish and helplessness. "I didn't know. Candy, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." In the funeral parlor, Candy's small body lay neatly on the long table at the center. My baby looked beautiful even in her eternal sleep, except that black and white photo didn't suit her at all. Candy hated black and white the most because when her dad wore black, it meant he was leaving for work, and when her mom wore white, it meant I couldn't stay with her. In a daze, I saw the moment Candy was born, then her babbling as she learned to call me Mom, from crawling unsteadily on all fours to taking her first wobbly steps. Looking back, I realized I hadn't spent more than 2 consecutive days with her in a long time. The pain and regret in my heart overflowed as tears. While washing my face, Derek appeared behind me. "Can I see Candy?" His voice was painfully humble. "If you leave on your own, I won't call security," I said, turning to walk away. But Derek grabbed my arm. Disgust surged in me and I yanked my arm free, almost screaming, "Don't touch me!" Derek froze, then lowered his head. "Emily, don't be so heartless to me." The anger and hatred I had been suppressing erupted. "How dare you say that to me?" "Derek, get out. Candy doesn't want to see you, and you don't deserve to see her. Don't disturb her final peace." The next moment I called security. Panic flashed across Derek's face. "Derek, I'm divorcing you." That was the last thing I said to him before he was dragged out by security. At home, there was still my younger sister in school who needed someone to look after her. My parents left for home right after Candy's cremation. Over the next few days, I hired a private investigator to gather evidence of Derek's infidelity during our marriage. Yes, I was going to sue him and ruin him. I rented a small apartment in the city with my own savings. But every morning on my way to work I'd find a bouquet of goldenrod and a custard bun I loved outside my door. Standing at the end of the hallway, he would watch me quietly. Goldenrod symbolizes waiting and apology. How ridiculous. I walked past him, throwing the items into the trash can right in front of him. But it seemed he was determined to atone for his sins, showing up at the hospital frequently to donate blood. I observed all this with nothing but anger and disgust, though my rational side didn't stop him. After all, it was his body being drained, and the beneficiaries were patients in need. As I was about to finish my shift one evening, I spotted Oliver. Oddly enough, he wasn't heading toward William's ward. Out of curiosity, I followed him. But as I rounded the corner, I found myself in the intensive care unit corridor. The hallway was eerily empty. Just as I wondered where Oliver had disappeared to, a voice spoke behind me. "Looking for me?" I shivered and turned around. Oliver stood there, smirking mischievously. "Who knew Dr. Emily had a habit of tailing people? Did you pick that up from your dear Derek?" What did he mean? What did this have to do with Derek? I tried to decipher his words, but the next moment, a soft, teasing voice came from the nearby ICU room. "Derek, does that feel good?" Oliver chuckled under his breath. "Looks like we came at the wrong time. I'll take my leave. Dr. Emily, I'll leave it to you to close the door for them." With that, Oliver turned and walked away. Only then did I notice the door to the room was ajar. They didn't even bother locking it. Something inside me was about to explode. Step by step, I approached the door and gently pushed it open. On the pristine white hospital bed, with his arm in a cast, William straddled Derek, moving his hips. "Derek, I knew you still had feelings for me. Otherwise, why would you come looking for me just a month after I left?" She chuckled softly. "Do you remember what you said back then? That woman, Emily, with her innocent first love face, is utterly dull in bed. Only I can satisfy you. We're the perfect match. You crave excitement, and I'm the only one who can give it to you." Derek didn't respond. His face showed an expression of pleasure as he closed his eyes, gripping William's arms tightly, moving in rhythm with her. In that moment, I realized I might never have truly known him. When we were together, he was always so gentle, taking the initiative in everything. He told me to leave everything to him, that he would take care of it. His actions were always soft and careful, never wanting to hurt me even slightly. He said that marrying me was the happiest and most fulfilling thing in his life. But clearly, he wasn't fulfilled at all. Beneath the polished exterior lay a filthy, disgusting soul. Suppressing the nausea that surged in my stomach, I quickly took out my phone. Recording a short clip, I barely had time to put my phone away before Derek, now sitting up because of a change in position, opened his eyes. The moment our gazes locked, the room fell into a deafening silence. "Emily." Shock and panic were written all over Derek's face. "Busted." William smiled as she got up, her eyes sparkling. It seemed her vision had fully recovered. Unashamed, she walked toward me step by step, her gaze provocative and triumphant, exuding the aura of a victor. "Emily, I think this is the first time we've spoken. See? You've lost. Your man can't stay away from me. Whether it was 7 years ago when you left or 2 years ago when you came back, all it takes is a crook of my finger, and he's mine. So what if you're married? So what if you have a child? Men are just like this. They'll go to whoever makes them feel good." That day, we were here too. The fury burning in my chest erupted at last, and I raised my hand and slapped her hard. So this was the hospital that day. They had simply switched rooms to avoid being caught by me. William turned her face slightly, her eyes flickering, but she didn't strike back. Instead, she gave me a bright smile. I don't know why, but for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a trace of relief in her eyes. In the silence that followed, Derek's hoarse voice finally broke the stillness. "Emily, can you forgive me?" "Sure," I said with a cold laugh, watching the hope light up in his eyes. "If you die, I'll forgive you." The venomous words spilled out, surprising even me. I never thought I'd say something so cruel. I tried to keep my emotions from overflowing. "Derek, if that day you hadn't gone looking for her, if you had stayed with me, with Candy, none of this would have happened. I was right there, and Candy was waiting for you. But you chose your desires. You left us behind. That was your choice. So no, you will never deserve forgiveness." Derek trembled all over, looking at me, his voice strained. "Candy is my daughter too. I never thought things would turn out this way. It was laughable." I cut him off, enunciating every word. "You didn't think, so now you want to erase it all? Even if Candy hadn't been hurt, your choices had already decided the outcome. Your heart has long since leaned toward her, yet you still wanted to hold on to me. You're too greedy, wanting both of us. In the end, this is my own fault. I knew about those 5 years you made me wait, while you and William did everything couples shouldn't and should do, and yet I forgave you." Derek's face went ashen as he looked at me in shock, as if trying to stop me from continuing. He stammered, "No." Exhaustion and sorrow consumed me, and the last tear rolled down my cheek. Derek, I regret it. I regret ever loving you. Back at my apartment, I contacted a private investigator. I asked him to look into any connections between Derek and Oliver. It didn't take long, just a couple of days, before he returned with the results. It turned out that just a month after we got married, Derek had been tracking Oliver to find William. No wonder Oliver once said my stalking skills were learned from Derek. From that moment on, Derek had been seeing William. At the time, her eyesight was fine. Her vision problems didn't start until a year and a half ago, when I gave birth to Candy. And her recovery? That had only happened in the past month. Not long after, I received a package containing intimate photos, videos, and messages between Derek and William. Though it lacked a sender's name, I already knew who it was from. Such personal and sensitive items could only come from one of the parties involved. I compiled the videos, photos, and recordings and sent them to Derek's company. At the same time, I filed for divorce. It didn't take long for Derek's colleagues, who already disliked him, to seize the opportunity to kick him while he was down. His company demoted him because of the scandal, and even awarded the position he was vying for to his rival. As for his rival, he introduced me to a highly skilled divorce attorney. Everything went smoothly. Derek not only signed the divorce papers in utter defeat, but also walked away with nothing. However, I had no desire to keep his money. I simply donated it to a hospital fund to help patients who couldn't afford treatment. After taking care of everything, I returned to the hospital, only to hear that William had been discharged. That same day, Oliver came to find me. In a quiet corner of the hospital, there was a large tree shielding the sunlight, creating a cool and shaded spot. He looked at me for a moment before finally speaking. "Thank you for not releasing those videos and photos online. Will asked me to tell you that her intentions that day were just to ensure that you and Derek would completely fall apart. She never anticipated things would go the way they did. She feels deeply guilty and apologetic." "So she sent you those things." At first, her plan was to expose Derek only after your divorce was finalized, as a way to exact revenge for him abandoning her all those years ago. She did harbor resentment toward you back then, which led her to such an extreme approach. I'm here to apologize on her behalf. To be honest, when I first saw those messages, I already understood. William had been deliberately playing on Derek's guilt, ensuring that he couldn't let go of her. She had always understood Derek better than I did. He was exactly the kind of man who didn't value what he had, but became unsettled the moment he lost it. When she thought she was on the brink of success, Candy's birth seemed to awaken Derek's conscience. He decided to cut ties with her. She tried to speed up her plan, but then her eyesight issues forced her to put everything on hold. During that time, she developed a new strategy. After recovering her vision, she quickly returned to the country and arranged to meet him, claiming it was for a farewell. But then the car accident happened. That incident seemed almost orchestrated by fate. She used Oliver to reveal the truth about how Derek's injury had occurred, once again triggering his guilt and sympathy. I listened to Oliver's words with a sense of irony. While William's actions were driven by revenge and Candy's situation was an unfortunate mistake, I still couldn't bring myself to forgive her. But I had to admit, my cursed compassion got the better of me, and I softened. I merely released those message records publicly. Once everything had settled, I requested an extended leave from the hospital. My plan was to travel around with Candy's ashes. My first stop was Colorado. The scenery by the lake was stunning, with sunlight scattered across the water like broken fragments of gold. The hem of my dress swayed in the breeze, and the click sound of a camera shutter caught my attention. I turned to see Nathan standing beside me, handing me the photo he'd just taken. "Doesn't it look great?" I nodded. "I look great." Nathan laughed. "You're absolutely right." Looking at him, I couldn't help but smile too. I had come across Nathan by the lake when I saved him. He'd gone for a swim, but forgot to warm up and ended up with a cramp. I pulled him out of the water, and since then, he had stuck close to me. At first, I was reluctant, but he managed to prove his intentions were harmless. Eventually, I gave in, allowing this fellow traveler to accompany me on my trip through Colorado. His antics, pouting, pleading, and even feigning helplessness had worn down my resistance. To his credit, his photography skills were excellent. Even someone like me, who rarely posted photos, was tempted to share them on social media. It wasn't long before I received a friend request from an unfamiliar account. I ignored it, but the person persisted, sending a message that read, "Who's the man in the picture?" I immediately knew who it was. Slightly exasperated, I realized I had forgotten to block strangers from seeing my posts. Derek showed up later that evening while Nathan and I were enjoying a breezy lakeside dinner. We had ordered a couple's special, don't ask why. It was on promotion, and we couldn't resist the discount. What we didn't anticipate was how intimate and romantic the setup would be. "Emily?" a voice called out from behind. I was startled, but only for a moment. Without looking up, I continued eating my steak. Suddenly, another piece of steak appeared on my plate. It was from Nathan. "Try mine, it's delicious," he said, his tone light. Then, reaching over, he gently wiped the corner of my mouth, his gaze soft and tender. "Take your time eating. And after dinner, we can go for a walk before heading back to the hotel too. Continue where we left off last night." His sudden flirtatious remark caught me off guard for a second, but I quickly played along. "All right." Those words clearly struck a nerve with Derek, who abruptly pulled me up and dragged me away. I shot Nathan a reassuring glance, signaling him to stay put. In a secluded corner of the restaurant, Derek stood pale-faced, staring at me. "Emily, please, don't be with him." "Why not?" "I love you. Seeing you with someone else feels like I can't breathe." His breathing was labored, and his eyes were brimming with anguish. "Don't taint the word love," I replied coldly, looking at him with indifference. "What you're feeling isn't love. It's just the regret of losing something you once took for granted." "It's not like that." Derek's voice cracked, raw with emotion. "From the moment I saw you in high school, I've been in love with you. Back then, you got scratched by a stray cat that was stressed out, but instead of getting angry, you gently comforted it. At that moment, I thought to myself, how could there be such a silly girl like you? Have you always wondered why I kept pursuing you, even after you rejected me so many times? It's because that day, in the empty classroom, I knew you came in. When you brushed against my hair, I knew you felt something for me too. I knew you wanted to focus on your studies, so I tried not to disturb you too much. Even when you applied for a scholarship abroad, I didn't try to stop you. I was willing to wait for you. Especially after seeing your reply to my 9th love letter, I became even more determined to wait. I even found it amusing back then. Since I had carefully sealed the envelope myself, how could I not notice it had been opened? "But you didn't wait for me," I interrupted him before he could continue. My heart ached in a way it hadn't for a long time. I looked up at him, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Derek, you didn't wait for me. You found William. You said he was a stand-in, but after 5 years of companionship, you got used to his presence." Derek's whole body trembled. "I didn't love him. He just fulfilled my needs. When I was with you, I was so afraid of hurting you because in my eyes you were so pure and untainted. I always wanted to see you lose control, to see you in a mess, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I found William, someone similar to you, to experience what I wouldn't dare to with you. I regret it now. Candy's death broke my heart too. No one will ever call me Daddy in that sweet, soft voice again." He covered his face and knelt in front of me, his shoulders shaking. I didn't want to stay another second. "Don't ever appear in front of me again. You make me sick. And one more thing, don't ask me for forgiveness. You're asking the wrong person. From start to finish, the one you owe the most is Candy. Turning a corner, I saw Nathan leaning against the wall. What a disgusting excuse of a man, he sneered, spitting on the ground. He's a disgrace to all men. I couldn't help but laugh. So, you eavesdrop now too? Nathan's face turned red, and he looked a little guilty. I was just worried about you. I shook my head helplessly. Looking at the boy in front of me who felt more like a younger brother, I said, "Let's go." "All right." Suddenly I remembered something and teased him. "Technically speaking, are you even a man?" "What?" I pointed at him and made a gesture in front of him. It took him a moment to catch on. His expression turned awkward and conflicted as he tried to think of a comeback. In the end, he gave up in frustration, unable to say a word. Derek had driven overnight from Colorado, only to crash through a guardrail due to fatigue. His car tumbled down a steep slope. Both he and the car were destroyed. When I found out about the accident, I didn't have much of a reaction. I just instinctively clutched the small vial hanging around my neck. I murmured, "Candy, do you think you can forgive him?" "Absolutely not." Nathan's voice suddenly burst out from behind me, startling me. "Here!" He thrust a bouquet of orange roses into my hands. "What's this for?" I asked, puzzled. "To wish you a full recovery and a happy life from now on," he said earnestly. I smiled and nodded, accepting the flowers. "Thank you," I said. "I will. I'll let go of everything and live well, carrying Candy's share of happiness with me." The end.